Hello, welcome back to Going Walkabout. Today I start a new little mini-series about SwiftUI and Firebase Authentication. It's going to be the journey for Going Walkabout from the current authentication system to the new authentication system. My current authentication uses Firebase Authentication, and that's going to stay, but I'm going to extend it in many ways. Today it's still using UIKit, it's spread all out of the application, and I want to move to SwiftUI. I also want to implement sign in with Apple and maybe also sign in with Google. And most importantly, I don't want to make sign in or registration a mandatory first step, but I want to open up part of the application as an anonymous user. So I can attract more users and the people can just feel a little bit more about the application. I want to remove the hurdle to register at the beginning of the application. Now this is going to be a pretty long project. It's going to be quite hard and it's a transition I need to do in the existing application. Today I'll first show you what I have. So what is the starting point where I start, and I also make the first step in refactoring so I can better use what I had today into the SwiftUI implementation. So let's dive into the application. First, what we see, this is what you get when you start up the application. Always, whether you're registered or not. So you can either register, username, password, register, done, and you can sign in with a username and a password. And that's it. Now, there's a few things I want to extend on this. I want to be able to sign in with Apple and optionally sign in with Google. So this screen for registration and the screen for SwiftUI will change. But also, when you start the application, it would be much nicer if you can preview some application, if you do a little bit explore, that you get a little bit of a sense of what you can do with it. So that will mean that I do not check for authentication at startup anymore, but I will do those checks when necessary and the behavior will change. Now I think this is all a little bit easier to implement in SwiftUI, I'm not sure, but I'm on that path to migrate to SwiftUI anyway, so I make SwiftUI the leading path in going forward. And let's look at what we have today. Now what you see here is my startup view controller that we have here, and what it does the authentication change listener from Firebase Authentication. What Firebase works is that you have to create an instance of this listener, and when something in the authentication chain changes, you can react on it. So when this fires, if there's a user, I can fetch the user, check and do all my things. And of course this whole implementation here you see is specific for my application, but yours will be different, but I need to encapsulate this somewhere, and if it is not, then I actually show my login panel and a few things that happens. Now you notice already that I have in my startup view controller all this business logic for doing this. Now if I go to my login view controller, there's also the view loads. If you press the login action, that's what we see here, the sign in button. All this business logic of doing the out and the sign in from Firebase is here in the view controller. Same for the registration. So the first step I need to take is to take this all out, put it into, call it the business component. I'm going to create an authentication manager, and that authentication manager will then be reused in my existing UIKit implementation, so I know for sure that everything I did after the refactoring is still working, and then I'll start using it in a SwiftUI user interface, but that will be the next episode. So first, today I'm going to focus on this refactoring. And it's actually a lot more because, well, we have the password view controller, where we can, in the settings, because if you're signed in, you can change your password, and this changing password here again, that's all in the view controllers. So what I've done so far, I've actually done all my Firebase authentication business logic in the view controllers where I needed it. And now I need to extract that and put it into an application manager or an authentication manager. So let's have a look at that. Okay, let's have a look where we are today. This is what I did. I created an application manager, and that application manager I just created as a singleton. And I don't want to go into debate whether a singleton is good or not. I like it because I can actually use it anywhere in the application where I want, and I'll show you that. And I see advantages of using a singleton in this scenario. Now, when I'm 100% SwiftUI, it might become an environment object. But today, in the hybrid mode, using a singleton for me is the easiest to work with. So let's go into this path. Now, on my application manager, I need the current user that I can retrieve from the Firebase Auth. So basically, it means that all my Firebase Auth connections are managed from this authentication manager. As you see, I have the sign in here as a function, and the sign in, it will just use a completion, and then on the completion I can do the application specific parts. But this is what I need to do for my application. But if we continue here a little bit, you will see here my listen for authentication changes. And this is the one that I used in my startup view controller to create an instance of this to react on a logged in or not logged in state. And the content of this function is actually the same as I had in my view controller, but I've extracted it out. Now, in my startup view controller, you will see it is gone. And there's another reason for that, because I introduced a new, let's say, initial view controller to do that. It's my login view controller, and the loading view controller. And the loading view controller, the only thing it does is actually creating an instance of my authentication manager. So it starts up this listen for changes. And since this is the initial view controller, it stays in scope. I also think I could better move this to my app delegate, but for now this works, and this is how I continue working with it. Now, let's go the authentication manager. If we now have a change of authentication, that's what we have here. This fires, and it goes through all the constructions of dealing with navigating to either my login, or this what you see startup screen, or to the actual application here. But if we then get into my sign in screen, so let's go to the sign in. Here I ask, it's the same user interface, it's the same UIKit application that we see here, it's the login view controller. But now on the login action, goes to my authentication manager chat, signed in, and it will get my username and password from the user interface, pass it in, and it will do actually the things that it needs to do and that it did before in my view controller. Now, this logic needs to stay in the view controller because that's where it's happening, but the actual login functionality is now in the application manager. And this allows me to reuse this application manager also in my SwiftUI applications for the next episode. And this is the important part. Now, the same is true, for instance, for the register view controller. Of course, this register view controller here still has the same fields and the same field logic here, but the register action, of course, it does a guard to check some things, but then it goes to my authentication manager chat, do the sign up the way it works. And this goes throughout the whole application. So even in my settings, where I actually already did some work in a view model in my settings for changing the password, so for instance the password view model, this one now uses my authentication manager update password. So all places where I had some Firebase authentication usage in a view controller is all extracted out, put in my application authentication manager, and that's why I now have all that functionality in one place. It's not 100% yet, there's still a few traces here and there, and I still need to fix those and deal with that, but I will do that before it's all completed. And now I can still go and do a sign in. So if I go and sign in here, well, it will use exactly the same logic than before, and it will do the sign in. Now, there's a little bit of issue with my trips, but if I go to my profile, I am signed in with the correct user, and I have notifications. It's not yet loading the trips, but that is a different issue, has nothing to do with my authentication logic. Now, what you have seen today is that I took all places where I had business logic in my UIKit view controllers, put that into my authentication manager, and of course I implemented the authentication manager in my UIKit screens. So I have the same functionality as I had before, but I have all my authentication logic concentrated in my authentication manager. And this allows me to now reuse that authentication manager with a SwiftUI interface for the login, the startup, and well, everything related to authentication as you saw it before. And that is going to be what I do in the next episode. So you have to wait for that. So please like and subscribe, click the notification icon so you get notified when that episode comes out. And for now, this is it. It's my first step of a journey to improve my whole authentication. And I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.